Before we get started today, guys, we have a special ask of you. I don't know how you found the podcast or how long you've been listening to The Next Man Up, but chances are someone shared this with you and invited you to become part of our community. And that is exactly what we are asking you to do for someone else. We have seen some encouraging growth in our podcast over the last few months, but we know all too well that there's so many dads out there that could benefit from listening and participating in this discussion around what it means to be a man and what it means to raise healthy and godly men. So, will you invite someone to join our community by sharing this podcast with them? In Apple Podcasts or in Spotify, you can find the 3 horizontal dots, which will give you the option to share the show or share the link. And if you're using a podcast player, that feature is there as well. More importantly, think of someone you know in your circle of influence, in your family, in your friends, in your coworker sphere that would benefit from being a part of this community, and do us a favor and share this podcast with them. In that way, you can help us continue to accomplish our mission of raising healthy and godly men. Thank you in advance for helping us this way. Okay, now let's get to today's episode. This is the show dedicated to raising up the next generation of men of faith and character. My name is Mark Stanifer. Welcome to The Next Man Up.
Part of the NRT Podcast Network.
Well, hey guys, welcome back once again to the Next Man Up podcast. So good, as always, to have you with us. And along in this journey of a community that is about raising up healthy and godly men. And we believe when we do that, the whole world becomes a better place. You know this, my name is Mark. I'm joined once again by Josh. Good to see you again, my friend.
Good to see you.
I think we've got an interesting topic to tee up today. Would you agree?
I would agree.
Okay. So let me provide some context for where we're going.
Please do.
Occasionally, often, frequently, I will come across an article that catches my attention. Mm-hmm. And I just recently did. And what caught my attention in this article is the way it was presented. So the article appeared a while back in The Atlantic. And as always, we'll post a link to that in the show notes. And it's called, "There's a Better Way to Parent, Less Yelling, Less Praise."
I'm on board.
Okay, I'm intrigued as well. So started working through this article because as you know, there's lots of different parenting philosophies today.
Yes.
And quite honestly, many of them are just bad. Let's just call it what it is. They're bad.
Yes. I will say though, I haven't heard of a parenting philosophy that says more yelling, more. Well, I've heard more praise.
Yep.
But I don't think I've heard any that advocate yelling more often.
Which is why this one got us both intrigued,
yes.
Right? Like, okay, what could this look like? So, as some additional context, an NPR journalist and author by the name of MacLeod wrote a book recently called Hunt, Gather, Parent, with the subtitle, "What Ancient Cultures Can Teach Us About the Lost Art of Raising Happy, Helpful Little Humans."
Well, you got me at ancient cultures.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and a lot of what we're about comes out of the wisdom of our forefathers, you know, in preparing boys to become men. And so I'm intrigued as well. So she writes this book and then has a conversation with a journalist at The Atlantic, and that's the sum of the article. The book is her experiences with at least 3, I haven't read the book, but at least 3 different cultures that are still in existence today. Cultures that we might look at today from our Western civilized advanced mindset and perspective as primitive, but still very much viable cultures.
Yes.
And with wisdom to bear on life today, even if it's not like the latest and greatest app or he said, she said on Twitter, right?
Yeah.
They still have relevance because of their tradition and their wisdom. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
I would say that it's so easy to think that we have everything figured out. But
Right.
we've probably forgotten more than
We
realize.
know. Yeah. Yeah. So she visited 3 different cultures: Mayan culture, Inuit culture, and Tanzanian culture. Different communities within these broader cultures, and she just spent time with them.
Yeah, and very different places as well.
Very different places, very different climates, very different people and traditions, and yet she pulled some wisdom from these different communities and how to parent. And so a couple of quotes, I guess, from her to get us started. Our culture often has things backward when it comes to kids. Okay, I'm intrigued. And then another quote that stood out in relation to toys today. She said, "Kids spent 200,000 years without these items. Basically, throw out your modern day toys because kids can be kids without them."
Well, that's interesting. I mean, it's not hard to go back to ancient Egypt and see dolls. So I'm wondering what she means by toys.
Fair enough. And maybe that is more defined in the book. Again, this is a transcript from a conversation.
True.
But I would say that I've spent enough time outside of this country and in different cultures to know that the things we have today, the things our kids have today, are not necessities for happiness and healthiness.
I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so we both read this article. We've kind of teed up what the book is about and what the author was trying to get at. So let's tease out, I guess, some of the things that stood out. So do you want to take a shot and in reading through this article, what's something that stood out to you?
Yeah, so the first thing that stood out to me was actually in the title of the article, which is less yelling, which I'm all for. Like, I don't prefer to yell at my son. I don't think that's super productive. And so I agree with her in the way that she described it. Like most cultures, that the 3 cultures that she observed, there's almost no yelling at kids for misbehaving in these cultures.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that I really appreciate about my wife. So my wife has a degree in education, and she has these amazing skills at de-escalating my highly emotional son. And she just is able, she does these jujitsu moves to redirect his energy and just de-escalate things. I don't.
I can relate.
But I agree with her. Like, I appreciate what she's doing. I just am not quite as good at it. And so generally, like my son, 2.5, full tantrum mode about really silly things. Like this morning he was standing in my living room screaming at the top of his lungs because my wife was vacuuming in our master bedroom. I don't know why that was an emotional event for him, but it was. And my approach to dealing with that situation is what I've heard described as pacing. And so I approach that of like, I need to interrupt the tantrum first to de-escalate the tantrum.
Got it.
So an initial like, hey, kind of thing to like grab his attention. And like, I try to be louder than him for an instant just to like break him out of it.
Yeah.
The problem is it doesn't really work that well. So I think I have some changes to make in my approach to de-escalating situations with my son. But I think that she's right on that you can't match high energy with high energy because that just ends up spiraling upwards. You can't fight fire with fire. You have to fight fire with water.
Yeah.
In most situations. Although there is the exception of oil well fires, but now we're getting really, really into the weeds.
The analogy works like all analogies up to a certain point where it doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
So anyways, the author of this book says, if you have high energy, you have to come in with low energy to pull that energy out of your child. And I would agree with her because I watch my wife do it all the time.
So I'm fortunate to have a wife similar to yours who was educated to be an educator. And I wouldn't use jujitsu. I would use Jedi. She just Jedis these kids to calm them down or to move them in a helpful direction, not manipulate, but intervene and be the adult, be the parent, right? But my response, I think, similar to yours back when my kids were that age, was often more of a default response. And like, this one, I saw my kids as a nail. I had a hammer, which was volume and loud and powering up to prove that I'm the dad and I'm in control in this situation. But the hammer wasn't always the best tool, and I needed to put more tools in my toolbox, and I learned that as I went. But that initial response for me, that anger, that more emotion, matching the energy, matching the emotion, was often my default response, and it took discipline to respond in a different way.
Yeah. So there's this concept called pacing. And the way I heard it described is you can't stop a stampeding herd of horses by just standing in front of them calmly. You actually have to get in front of that stampede. You have to be faster than the stampede. And then once you gain leadership of the stampede, you can slow it down.
Back it down. Yeah.
And that was my whole like interjection approach to de-escalating things with my son. I don't know how well it works in human situations, but it's in psychology. You'll look it up. It's called pacing. And I think it has to do with motivation. If you're just getting loud because you're angry because your child is being loud or obnoxious or throwing a tantrum or whatever, and you probably need to check your heart on that. But if your goal is to interrupt the process, that emotional feedback cycle that a tantrum gets into, like if that's your goal, to break the cycle so you can pull that emotional energy out, I think there might be a place for that.
So a controlled and disciplined outburst of energy on your part to then get to really where you want to go, which is de-escalation.
Yeah, so it's immediate and sharp and quick and fast, and then you have to follow it up immediately with low energy.
Yeah.
So you don't come in high and stay high and continue to get. You have to like it's like the jab, and then you're like letting them fall to the floor gently.
Yeah.
Don't hit your kid. That's not what I'm saying.
Metaphorically.
I'm just saying metaphorically, it's a volume level like interruption for an instant so that you can bring in that low energy and bring things back down to a controllable place.
Yeah. It seems like a reasonable approach, again, with the right motivation and the right discipline to keep yourself in response mode rather than just react mode. There's something else in the title that intrigued me. Less yelling, your angle, less praise, my angle. So I'm not sure if I totally agree with her perspective on less praise, but maybe that's coming from someone who tends to be a little more judicious in doling out praise anyway. I want my kids to know and have from the beginning that I affirm them, that I believe in them, that I'm for them, that relationship is central and critical. At the same time, I understand, well, before I go there, part of that is praise. Part of that is affirming them. And there's also the importance of praising the effort, not just the outcome, right? Not tying your praise and affection and affirmation to the results, but to who the person really is. But I think in this climate, there is a tendency to perhaps go too far. And while at first I don't know that I agreed with her just based on the title, the more I understand what the author's getting at, the more I realize what she's suggesting is you can overdo it, which makes me also think of the participation trophy culture.
Oh man.
Right now, I could go on and on and on that, and I'll leave my soapbox under the desk. But I think the participation trophy culture really promotes praise to the point of everything being praiseworthy. Here's another example. I used to enjoy watching American Idol auditions.
Okay. Oh yeah.
And often there's somebody that gets through that should never have been through. And it makes for good television.
I think they're intentionally let through.
I think you're probably right, but I wonder, where was the parent, where was the adult in that child's life that says, you can't do anything you want to do. You aren't naturally gifted as a singer, and so if you want to do this, then I will support you, but let's have a real conversation about your natural given abilities. Are you able? Are you even? Are you ready?
And then they run into the reality of Simon.
Right. And just shreds them.
Yeah.
Shreds them. So again, great television, but at the expense of this child or person who was led to believe that they could do anything. And how dare you not praise me, right?
Yeah, it's one of the things. Actually, that whole teeing up people for failure thing is what turned me off of American Idol. I never liked that show because they would just intentionally rip people.
Yeah. Yep.
It didn't seem very fair. But it was necessary. I just don't think it should have been nationally televised.
So, right, from the television angle, there's perhaps another way that it could have been presented, but it did make for entertaining television,
That's
right?
true.
As we're watching somebody else get shredded. Anyway, I always took it from the angle of where was the realism that an adult injected into that person's life.
It's definitely a failure of parenting.
Yeah.
By unfortunately giving too much praise for things that aren't praiseworthy.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. So anyway, what else?
Okay.
What else from your read through this article?
Okay, so there's this. I want to be careful about how I get into this topic because there's lots of nuance in here, and I don't know if I can really do it complete justice in the space of a few minutes on a podcast. But the author talks about this thing called alloparenting.
A word I'd never heard of before.
I've never heard of it before either. Apparently, allo is is A-L-L-O, is a prefix that comes out of Greek, I think, or Latin that means together. So it's together parenting is really what alloparenting means, which is community-based parenting. That's what she talks about in here. And as soon as I hear community-based parenting, the phrase that comes to mind is it takes a village. And the book that comes to mind is Hillary Clinton's book from the 90s, It Takes a Village. I think this, I don't know if there was a longer title. I think it was just It Takes a Village. And to me, there's a subtle dig against the nuclear family in this. And actually in the article, there's a not so subtle dig against the nuclear family that the nuclear family is unnatural and it's not the way that we're supposed to parent. And I get where she's coming from. The idea that the nuclear family, in the way that we understand it as two parents with their kids, and that's the family unit, isn't really how families are supposed to be. Families are supposed to be extended families. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandchildren.
Yep.
No, that it's a larger family than just the parents and their kids by themselves. But that, in my opinion, that nuclear family of the parents and the kids it's the single most important element of that extended family.
Yeah.
Because if those parents don't make those kids, there is no extended family. They're central, and everyone else is playing a supporting role in that nuclear family.
Yeah.
And this community-based parenting idea seems to always be attached to some sort of institutional solution to community parenting. And the examples that they use for alloparenting in the article are daycare and teachers and things like that.
Yep.
Where you're sending your kids off to another place to be with unrelated adults. That doesn't sound like parenting to me. That sounds like outsourced responsibility of some sort.
That's where your allergy to this comes
That's where
from.
my allergy comes from. It's not that I hate parents, or it's not that I hate teachers or that I hate daycare. There's places for them, but to call them parents seems a little weird to me. And to say that that's what community parenting is seems wrong to me. I think maybe a better example, and this might be rose-colored glasses to a certain degree, but like when I hear about a community taking care of kids together, I think of like a 1950s era neighborhood. Again, like rose-colored glasses, it wasn't all idealistic, and there were lots of problems in the 50s, and all the other disclaimers and the nuance that comes along with talking about this. Like let's
all
just
the
put that
fine
aside.
print.
All the fine print, and the disclaimers that go along with it, right? But the idea was that like you knew your neighbors.
Yeah.
That was the whole point of these suburban neighborhoods, is that you would know your neighbors. Like, and so your neighbors' kids would come hang out in your house and vice versa. And the whole neighborhood, that whole neighborhood community, would be looking out their windows, paying attention to what the kids were doing in the neighborhood. And I remember that to be the case in the 80s when I was growing up. Like, I was always over at my friend's house and vice versa. We were neighbors, and we had the full run of the neighborhood, and there are eyes everywhere.
Oh yeah, you didn't get away with anything.
Didn't get away with anything, no. But we never considered the other families in the neighborhood as though they were parents of us.
Yeah.
It seemed like the community felt responsible to make sure kids were not getting into trouble or getting hurt. But they didn't have the role of parents. And I think the distinction I would make is when you talk about community parenting, it has to be, if you want to do it well and not end up in weird dysfunctional situations, it has to be based on relationship, not institutions.
Yeah.
So as soon as you start building institutions, start outsourcing your responsibilities, start outsourcing your relationships, and you can't outsource relationships.
Yeah.
And so you have to, if you're gonna advocate for community, group parenting together, that has to be based on relationships, not paychecks. So your next door neighbors or your extended family, and honestly, I think extended family is the single best way to community parent. Like, not everyone has the advantage of having extended family in the city that they live in. They may have moved all over the place. We're a super mobile nation. We're a super mobile world now. People are moving all over the place. But if you can get close to extended parenting, especially for those young childhood years, it's super helpful in taking some of the pressure off of you as parents, getting help.
That's right.
It's super helpful for building stronger relationship root networks between people for your kids. There's just all kinds of advantages to it. And I think that's actually what she really means by community parenting. And I think that this like, well, daycare and all day schooling, that should be thrown into this. They're like, it's because it's the best option that people have when they don't have extended family around.
Right.
So a better way to do it is get involved in your church community. Build that community-based parenting thing around your church community, people who you know, who love you, who you love, who your kids are familiar with. But in all community-based situations, you have to be careful.
Yeah.
Because there's all kinds of stuff that happens behind closed doors that you need to make sure that everything's in the light all the time. So,
Back to don't just outsource it.
Yeah.
Be engaged.
Yep.
But also recognize the benefit of having those relationships around you.
Yep.
And how they can help you as the parent and help the kid. Yep. We've said this before, but how many times can somebody else? How many times does it happen that somebody says something into a kid's life that's the same thing you've been saying for years and years and years, and then they finally get it?
Yeah, then they get it.
Right.
And that's why I say, like, I don't hate teachers. Teachers have the amazing ability to speak things into kids' lives that their parents can't, or that kids won't receive from kids. But you also have to be careful about how much trust you have in the education system. There's tons of stuff that's come out this year about teachers who have said, like, in back-channel communications that got accidentally recorded, quote-unquote accidentally recorded, of teachers saying we need to get parents out of the classroom so we could teach the kids what we want. We need to make sure the parents aren't paying attention to us. That's scary to me. Yeah. It doesn't sound like community parenting at all. That sounds like indoctrination and weird institutional stuff. And we should work really hard to avoid that.
So it's a good distinction in understanding what is the definition of community-based parenting, right? Mm-hmm. And what is, from our perspective, what's a healthy definition versus a concerning definition. Mm-hmm. And yet recognizing that while the individual family is the starting point, there's benefit from having community around that family. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let me hit one other point that stood out to me.
Okay.
I thought this was interesting. So this comes out of the Inuit wisdom, and the quote is, "Young children are just these illogical, irrational beings who haven't matured enough."
There's some truth to that.
I agree. But the context was these kids are not manipulating their parents. They're just illogical, irrational beings who haven't matured enough.
Well,
time out.
I've been manipulated.
Time out. So while I agree that a 2-year-old, 4-year-old, 6-year-old does not have the fully developed brain and reasoning capability as a 25-year-old, I have seen 2-year-olds in my own family, as have you, be very manipulative in the way they try to get what they want. And I'm telling you, you don't have to teach this stuff. We can thank Adam and Eve once we connect with them for this, but you don't have to teach these kids how to manipulate others around them to get what they want. It's natural.
Yeah, I mean, even if you don't buy into the idea of original sin, let's say you don't buy into that, there's evolutionary advantages for young children figuring out how to manipulate the adults around them.
Yeah.
I mean,
survive, right?
That's why infants cry.
Right.
So to say that kids don't manipulate at all seems pretty naive to me.
I agree. And it's always interesting because I'm sure there's more to the story. And again, I haven't read the book, but just based on the two statements that are connected here, I don't understand how you can look at behavior of young kids and not conclude that at an early age they know how to cry, they know how to turn on the cry when there's something that they want. And if they're convinced they can't get it, they know how to turn it off as well.
Oh, man. So my son hates diaper changes, has hated it from the beginning. To this day, still has like mini temper tantrums on the changing table every diaper change. So
I bet that's been fun for the last 2.5 years.
It's been fantastic. Love it to death. So when he was about 18 months old, my wife had him up on the changing table, and he's screaming at the top of his lungs. And my wife says, "Can you just turn it off?" And he said, "Yes," and stopped crying. It was all this game that he was playing to like make the diaper change process miserable for us.
And it was working.
Until
it was interrupted.
Exactly.
Yeah. See,
now that doesn't mean that kids aren't irrational, because
correct.
They are.
Agree. Totally agree.
Because I've watched my son do very irrational things, and they're immature. They're totally immature and irrational, but that doesn't mean that they're not also manipulative.
Yeah, and I think maybe the point here is to be aware of both. So, yes. So as the adult in the room, recognize that your kid cannot reason at the same level that you can.
Right.
Don't expect the same level of logic and rational thinking. In fact, science today would tell us their brains aren't even developed until their mid-20s, fully developed. At the same time, don't underestimate their ability to use the tools that they have at their disposal to get what they want.
Right.
Again, who's the adult in the room?
Yeah.
I've seen it happen too many times. In fact, I know of a couple close to us in our circle who are without children, but very savvy in parenting because they've watched. And they have actually had to put up boundaries around them with parents who let their kids just run amok or out of control, that let the kids rule the family.
Yeah.
And they're like, look, we like you, but we can't be around that because it drives us crazy. I don't know how they say it, but it drives them crazy, and they recognize there's a better way. And so in that situation, what they're acknowledging is these parents are being manipulated by their kids to get what their kids want. And when your kid is an irrational, illogical, undeveloped being, you can't trust their desires, right? I'm in my late 40s. I'm not sure I can always trust my own desires.
True that.
let alone a toddler or a youngling. And yet, when we succumb to giving them what they want because they're crying or they're pitching a fit or because they're using the tool that they know how to use, essentially, I'm convinced anyway that we're letting them manipulate us.
Yes. Yes. And that's that wisdom element of like, or the discernment element of knowing or being able to figure out whether it's a manipulation thing or if it's just an immaturity, irrational thing. So, for instance, my son eats these food pouches, pureed food pouches. With
Okay.
They're actually kind of cool because you've got this like pureed like applesauce kind of deal like in these portable pouches. Fantastic. Throw them in the brand, good to go.
Right.
Well, he likes just two out of the like several dozen variants of various flavors of these food pouches. He likes exactly two of them, one with a red top and one with a green top. Well, sometimes he's hungry and irrational and he asks for the green top and he wants the red top, and then you have to go back and get the red top. Other times when we're trying to put him to bed, he asks for one so that he can make you go get the other. Which extends bedtime by about 45 seconds. And so you have to like be able to figure out like what's the goal here? Is he just hungry and being an idiot, or is he trying to avoid something he doesn't want?
Yeah. Who is the adult in the room? Who is the parent in the room?
Exactly.
And there's another element of this article and this book that gets at more of a family-centric based parenting approach versus just a child-centric approach. And I, for a long time, have been a strong advocate of a family approach to parenting versus a child approach. And we won't unpack all that here, other than to say that children are a part of the family unit. They don't exist just to be waited on and doted on by parents. They are part of the family unit. And unfortunately, I see a child-centric parenting approach all too often. And the wisdom that comes out of these communities that she has experienced speaks directly against that.
Yeah, so we may have sounded like we were really critical about this article, but we really aren't. We actually think that there's a lot of wisdom in this book. We haven't read the book, but based on the article, we think there's a lot of wisdom here. And I think it's worth just reading the article to read this section about family-based parenting versus child-based parenting, because I think she's right on. This idea that we cater to kids and make sure they're entertained is like, it's not super helpful. But when we include them in and being part of the family, what we're doing as a family actually helps your son become a man, helps him along that initiation process and that growth process and maturity process, because it's not about them. It's about how they could be a productive member of the family.
Right on. Right on. So guys, let's zoom out for just a second here and take the challenge this way. what type of parenting philosophy do you have? Have you thought through some of these things? Have you considered wisdom of previous traditions? Have you challenged some of your own default modes and considered more of a disciplined mode, an intentional mode? And that doesn't mean you always get it right, but you can experiment and try things intentionally and purposefully on discipline rather than just on default where everything is a nail and you pull out your hammer. Mm-hmm. That's the challenge. What are you taking away from this? What can you do different to help your boy to become the man that you are guiding him to be? And what does he need in a dad? What does he need in you as his parent to help him get there from beginning to end? That's the challenge. Mm-hmm. Well, Josh, thanks as always for your thoughts.
It's always good to talk with you.
I love these conversations. Let's do it again sometime soon.
I agree.
Sound good?
Yeah.
All right, listeners, thanks for being with us as well. And as always, we will be back, same bat time, same bat channel next week. Until then,
adios.
Hey, listeners, thanks for journeying with us on this Next Man Up podcast. You know, we would love to hear from you. Maybe you have a question or an idea, perhaps a topic for us to consider. If that's you and you want to reach out to us, you can get us at feedback@thenextmanup.com. That's feedback@thenextmanup.com. Again, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, we'll see you later.